When Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, the world mourned the loss of the king of rock and roll. Newspapers ran headlines about his music, his movies, his iconic status as an entertainer who had changed popular culture forever. But in the weeks and months following his death, another story began to emerge, quietly at first, then building into a revelation that surprised even his closest friends. Lawyers handling Elvis's estate discovered records of charitable donations he had explicitly instructed to remain anonymous. Hospital administrators came forward with stories of medical bills mysteriously paid in full, always with the same instruction: never reveal the donor's identity. Families across America started sharing their own stories of encounters with Elvis that had changed their lives, moments of kindness that had been kept private out of respect for his wishes. What emerged was a portrait of a man whose humanitarian legacy might be even more significant than his musical one, a pattern of compassion and generosity that had been deliberately hidden from public view for decades. This is the story of Elvis Presley's secret life as one of America's most dedicated philanthropists, told through the people whose lives he transformed, and the moments that reveal the true measure of the man behind the legend. If you want to discover the side of Elvis that changed thousands of lives but was deliberately kept secret, please subscribe to our channel. This documentary reveals stories that have never been compiled together until now. Elvis's approach to charity was unusual, especially for someone of his fame and status. Most celebrities in the 1960s and 1970s used their charitable work as part of their public image, hosting televised fundraisers, having their donations publicly announced, ensuring that their generosity enhanced their brand. Elvis did the opposite. He had a specific clause written into his charitable giving that his identity should never be revealed. When he paid hospital bills, the families were told only that an anonymous donor had covered their expenses. When he established scholarship funds, the documentation listed generic foundation names with no connection to Elvis Presley. When he donated to organizations serving vulnerable populations, he insisted on no publicity, no press releases, no acknowledgement whatsoever. This wasn't modesty or false humility. It was a deliberate philosophy rooted in Elvis's own understanding of dignity and respect. Elvis had grown up in grinding poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi, where his family had sometimes relied on charity to survive. He remembered what it felt like to be on the receiving end of help, the strange mixture of gratitude and shame that came with accepting assistance. He didn't want the people he helped to feel that shame, didn't want them to feel obligated to publicly thank him or perform gratitude for the cameras. He wanted his help to be clean, uncomplicated by the power dynamics that usually accompany celebrity charity. When Elvis helped someone, he wanted it to feel like a gift between equals, not a transaction between a powerful benefactor and a grateful recipient. This philosophy shaped every act of kindness throughout his career, creating a hidden legacy that would only fully emerge after his death. Madison Square Garden, June 1974. 9-year-old Sarah Mitchell had been born profoundly deaf and had never heard music in any traditional sense. Her parents brought her to Elvis's concert hoping she could experience music through vibrations, through the physical feeling of sound waves traveling through her body. When they asked security if Sarah could stand close enough to the speakers to feel these vibrations, they were told no. Fire codes, safety regulations, maximum capacity already reached. The argument that followed drew attention, pulled focus from the performance, and eventually reached Elvis himself mid-song. He stopped the music, demanded to know what was happening, and when he learned about Sarah's situation, he made an immediate decision that would change accessibility in the music industry. Elvis brought Sarah on stage, lifted her up, and placed her small hands directly on the massive speaker grills. As he sang "Can't Help Falling in Love," Sarah experienced music for the first time, not through her ears but through every cell in her body. Vibrations resonating in her chest and traveling up her arms, creating a sensory experience of sound that was completely new to her. The 20,000 people in that arena watched in silence, many crying, as Elvis knelt beside Sarah and learned basic sign language from her mother to communicate with her. But Elvis didn't stop with this single beautiful moment. He announced that from that point forward, all his concerts would include accessible areas specifically designed for deaf and hard of hearing fans, spaces where they could safely experience music through vibrations and visual elements. He committed funding to develop these spaces and to train venue staff in accessibility accommodations. This wasn't a publicity stunt. Elvis followed through completely, working with deaf advocacy organizations to understand best practices, hiring sign language interpreters for his shows, and using his influence to pressure other artists and venues to consider accessibility. Within 2 years, major concert venues across America had implemented accessibility sections, directly influenced by Elvis's advocacy. Sarah Mitchell, the little girl whose tears had stopped Elvis mid-performance, grew up to become a music therapist, specializing in helping deaf children experience music. She spent her career expanding on what Elvis had started, creating programs and technologies that made music accessible to people who experienced it differently than hearing people. The ripple effects of that one night in 1974 continue today. Every time a deaf person attends a concert with proper accommodations, every time accessibility is considered in venue design. Detroit, August 1975. David Patterson was 14 years old and had lived in 12 different foster homes since age 4. His biological parents were gone, his mother dead from an overdose when David was barely old enough to remember her face. His father disappeared before he was born. For 10 years, David had been passed from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to feel like he belonged, never connecting with foster parents who saw him as temporary, rather than as a child who desperately needed permanence and love. The only constant in David's chaotic life was Elvis's music. Every new bedroom got the same worn Elvis poster. Every night ended with Elvis's voice on the transistor radio, a reliable presence in a world where nothing else lasted. When David's current foster mother got him a ticket to see Elvis perform in Detroit, he thought it might be the best night of his life. He didn't expect it to become the night that changed his entire future. Elvis noticed David during the third song, saw him crying uncontrollably in the second row, tears that had nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with accumulated grief and longing. Elvis stopped the show during intermission to find out what was wrong, and when his security chief reported back what David had said, Elvis was devastated. David had told security that Elvis was the only father figure he had ever known, that Elvis's music had been more constant than any adult in his life, that listening to Elvis was the closest David had ever come to feeling like someone cared about him. Elvis brought David backstage, held him while he cried, listened to his story, and made a decision that demonstrated real commitment rather than temporary emotion. Elvis brought David back on stage for the second half of the concert and made a public declaration in front of 25,000 witnesses. He put his arm around David's shoulders and told the entire arena that from that moment forward, David was not alone, that Elvis was claiming him as his son, that anyone who wanted to argue about it could try. The legal process began immediately. Within weeks, Elvis had become David's legal guardian, had moved him to Memphis, enrolled him in school, arranged for therapy, and introduced him to Lisa Marie as her new brother. This wasn't adoption as charity or as a publicity stunt. Elvis treated David like his actual son, was present in his life, helped with homework, taught him guitar, included him in family events, proved through daily actions that his commitment was real and permanent. The impact extended far beyond David's individual story. Adoption agencies across America reported massive increases in inquiries following the publicity around Elvis and David, with many families specifically citing their story as inspiration. Elvis used his platform to advocate for foster care reform, speaking in interviews about the hundreds of thousands of children waiting for permanent families, establishing funding for adoption support services, and challenging the cultural narrative that older children in foster care were somehow less deserving of families than younger children. David himself, inspired by what Elvis had given him, became a social worker specializing in foster care and adoption. He spent his career helping other kids find permanent families, established the Elvis Presley Foster Care Foundation, and dedicated his life to expanding the legacy Elvis had begun. Montgomery, Alabama, April 1969. Exactly 1 year after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, Elvis was performing in the birthplace of the civil rights movement with 4 black women, the Sweet Inspirations, as his prominently featured backup singers. The South was still raw from desegregation battles, still resistant to change, still harboring people who viewed integration as an attack on their way of life. When a racist slur rang out from the crowd mid-concert, aimed at those 4 women on stage, Elvis faced a choice between his career and his conscience. He chose conscience. He stopped the music, confronted the heckler publicly, and made a speech that would be quoted for decades afterward about respect, dignity, and the debt that white rock and roll artists owed to black musicians who had created the genre. But Elvis didn't stop with words. He told anyone in the audience who couldn't respect the women on stage to leave right then, with refunds waiting at the door. He stood there in silence while hundreds walked out, proving to the thousands who remained that he was willing to sacrifice ticket sales and fan approval for basic human decency. He then gave the Sweet Inspirations a full spotlight solo performance, something unprecedented for backup singers, ensuring that the night became about celebrating them rather than about the racism they had faced. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, but more importantly, Elvis's actions that night influenced how other white artists treated their black collaborators, how venues thought about artist safety and dignity, and how the entertainment industry began having more honest conversations about racism and exploitation. The Sweet Inspirations, who had spent years being treated as anonymous background voices despite their immense talent, found their careers transformed by Elvis's public support. They received more recognition, better opportunities, and, most importantly, more respect from an industry that had often used their talent while diminishing their humanity. Cissy Houston, the group's leader and Whitney Houston's mother, later credited that night in Montgomery as a turning point not just in their careers, but in how they were treated as artists. Elvis's willingness to risk his Southern fanbase to defend black women sent a message that reverberated through the industry, contributing to broader conversations about equity and respect that were desperately needed in 1969 and, frankly, remain relevant today. These 3 stories represent just a fraction of Elvis's humanitarian work, but they reveal a consistent pattern in how he approached helping others. There was the 12-year-old wheelchair user in Houston who was trying to reach the stage during a 1969 concert. Elvis saw the struggle, stopped the show, personally carried the boy onto the stage, and dedicated the rest of the performance to him. Afterward, Elvis quietly arranged for the boy's family to receive a specialized wheelchair and covered years of physical therapy costs, all anonymously through his lawyer. There was the cancer patient in Las Vegas, a woman named Sarah, who had written Elvis a fan letter 3 years earlier, mentioning that seeing him perform was on her bucket list. Elvis remembered her letter, recognized her face in the front row during a 1975 show, stopped the performance to acknowledge her, and spent 2 hours with her backstage after the show. When he learned she was terminal, he rearranged his entire tour schedule to visit her in the hospital in Iowa, bringing his band to perform a private concert in her room. Sarah died 6 months later, and Elvis sent her family a letter every month until his own death 2 years later. There was the homeless Vietnam veteran who climbed onto the stage during a 1971 Tampa concert, clearly struggling with what would now be diagnosed as PTSD. Instead of having security remove him, Elvis sat down on the stage and listened to the man talk for 5 minutes, then embraced him and dedicated the show to veterans. Backstage, Elvis arranged for the man to receive mental health treatment and housing assistance, following up personally to ensure he got the help he needed. The veteran later became a successful small business owner and credited Elvis with saving his life. There was the immigrant father in Chicago who held up a sign in broken English about how Elvis's music had helped his family feel welcome in America. Elvis stopped the concert, brought the man on stage, learned an Italian phrase from him, and made it his show closer for the next month. The single mother in Memphis who couldn't afford concert tickets found her entire family not only admitted but given VIP treatment, and later discovered that Elvis had quietly paid 2 years of her rent and established college funds for all 4 of her children. The 8-year-old blind girl who was singing Elvis songs outside a venue got a private backstage concert and a promise of ongoing support that Elvis kept, funding her music education through high school. Each story followed the same pattern: Elvis noticing someone in need, responding immediately with genuine compassion rather than calculated charity, and then following through with sustained support rather than one-time gestures. He didn't do these things for publicity or tax benefits or image management. He did them because he saw people who needed help and he had the resources to provide it, and he believed that was reason enough. After Elvis's death, his accountants and lawyers revealed the staggering scope of his anonymous charitable giving. He had been donating approximately 50% of his annual income to various causes, a percentage that far exceeded typical celebrity philanthropy both then and now. He had established scholarship funds at multiple universities, specifically for students from low-income backgrounds. He had paid off the mortgages of strangers whose financial struggles he learned about through friends or news stories. He had covered medical expenses for hundreds of families dealing with catastrophic illnesses, always through lawyers with instructions that his involvement never be revealed. He had funded community centers, youth programs, and support services in Memphis and throughout the South, often in predominantly black neighborhoods that rarely received philanthropic attention. His will included provisions for ongoing charitable giving, establishing foundations that would continue his work after his death. The Elvis Presley Charitable Foundation, revealed only after he died, had been quietly operating for years, providing grants to organizations serving children, the elderly, and vulnerable populations. Staff members at Graceland later reported that Elvis would sometimes disappear for hours, driving around Memphis, looking for people who needed help, stopping to give money to homeless individuals, paying for strangers' groceries when he overheard them worrying about prices. He carried large amounts of cash specifically for these impromptu acts of generosity, creating countless stories of brief encounters with Elvis that families treasured but rarely shared publicly during his lifetime. The true measure of Elvis Presley's legacy isn't found in his record sales, or his #1 hits, or his cultural impact on music and entertainment, though all of those are significant. The true measure is found in the lives he changed, the families he helped, the children he gave hope to, the systemic changes he influenced through his advocacy. Sarah Mitchell became a music therapist, helping thousands of deaf children experience music. David Patterson became a social worker who helped countless foster children find permanent families. The sweet inspirations achieved recognition and respect that influenced how black backup singers were treated throughout the industry. The accessibility accommodations Elvis championed became standard practice at major venues. Beyond these specific ripple effects, Elvis demonstrated what responsible celebrity looks like, what it means to use privilege and platform for purposes beyond self-promotion. He showed that true generosity doesn't require publicity, that helping others doesn't need to be transactional or image-enhancing. He proved that compassion is a choice that can be made consistently, daily, in ways both public and private. In an era increasingly focused on performative activism and celebrity philanthropy as brand management, Elvis's approach feels almost radical, its sincerity and humility offering a countermodel to the self-congratulatory charity that dominates modern celebrity culture. When people ask what made Elvis Presley the king, the answer usually focuses on his voice, his charisma, his revolutionary impact on music. But perhaps the real answer is found in moments like these. Stopping a concert to help a deaf child experience music. Claiming a foster kid as a son in front of thousands of witnesses. Risking his career to defend black women from racism. Using his resources and platform to change lives while deliberately avoiding credit or recognition. That's royalty, not of entertainment, but of character. A kingship earned through compassion rather than crowned through fame. Elvis Presley made music that changed the world, but more importantly, he lived a life that changed individual worlds, one person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, creating a legacy of compassion that continues to inspire decades after his death. That's the story worth remembering, the legacy worth celebrating, the king worth honoring.